Welcome to the Strong Homes, Safe Families podcast, where we tackle any topic that affects the disaster safety and resilience movement. My name is Leslie Chapman Henderson. I'm with the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, FLASH, and I'm going to be your host today. So today we're going to tackle the topic of building codes, and to help us do that, we have the lead physical scientist from FEMA, John Gargiola. Welcome, John.
Leslie, it's great to be here.
Thanks for doing this. And also, this is exciting for me because we've been friends and worked together for a very long time. Now, before we get into building codes and before we talk about the challenges with building codes with respect to disaster safety, I know a lot about the cool things that you do beyond your job. So I was hoping you'd share some of that insight about you and your interests with our audience.
Oh, okay, great. That I would love to share. So sort of in my hobby and my background and my upbringing and my cultural background, I have roots in Italy, Sicily. In particular, my father was born there and his father and so on and so forth. And many, many years ago, more than 100 years ago, my grandfather had gotten some land and planted olives and grapes. And today there's the Gargiola olive groves. And recently, my brother and I inherited these olive groves. And I've always I've been fond of gardening. And so I love making things grow, particularly vegetables. I'm not really good at flowers. But because of this background and this cultural history there, many, many visits to Italy, to Sicily, and helping my father and my cousins to harvest the olives and bring them to the olive oil factory and make the olive oil for the Gargiola family and to sell to the market. So that's something that is a passion of mine, and it's something that I look forward to returning to Sicily this fall. I haven't been able to travel to do the harvest again, maybe bring my kids along and have something of a legacy. The cool thing about that, Leslie, is it's in a beautiful part of Italy, in Sicily in particular. It overlooks the Mediterranean, there's gentle hills, and it's among the remnants of these incredible temple ruins, built 2,500 years ago, majestic temple columns that still exist today. And so you're picking the olives, you see the Mediterranean Ocean, you see these structures that withstand the test of time. And I think that's influenced my upbringing and my career and my passion where I am today.
Well, that's so interesting. And I hope that I catch up with you in the fall after you get back. And maybe I can, I'd love to see a jar of olive oil or the label and what you got. Because I know olive oil is the root of a lot of great products. So let's talk about what you did pursue in your studies. Tell us about your educational background and your pedigree.
Yeah, I grew up in and around New York City and went to public school, and I was good in math and science. And I got this idea to apply to the Cooper Union for Advancement of Science and Art, a very, very competitive small school in New York City, highly selective. And those that are fortunate to get admitted get a full tuition scholarship. And I applied. I put in my best application, and I just thought, no, it's just, it's not going to happen. But when the letter came in the mail that I've been accepted, I mean, that was truly remarkable and something that, again, has shaped who I am and what I've pursued and where I am today. So I have that gratitude for having the opportunity to study engineering amongst the, most competitive schools in the country.
That's fantastic. And so after your studies, you moved into your profession, but you didn't immediately come to FEMA. What were some of your early roles before FEMA?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was eager to apply my knowledge of what I had learned in the construction field, in the construction industry, and had the opportunity to work for a large real estate developer, construction company, housing developer in New York City. And their main focus was on housing for the elderly, housing for low-income families in and around New York City. So that was an incredible experience to work as a construction manager and a construction estimator and then, following these projects, and some were complete new construction and some were gut rehabilitation. So I got a lot of experience there. I remember my first housing project that I completed, and I was there for like the walkthrough, and some of the tenants were moving in, and this elderly woman from down the hall signaled to me, "Come over here." So it seemed like it was very important, something urgent she wanted to tell me. And I was young and nervous, and I thought, "Oh, there's something wrong with her unit." She said, "Are you the builder?" And I said, "Oh, I work for the builder." And then her face changed, and she sort of teared up, and she said, "I just want to thank you for giving me a safe and affordable and comfortable place to live, as something I've never had before. So I just wanted you to know that." So that kind of touched me very, very greatly. It's like, if that's something that I can help, and that's my role to help others. Let's see what I can do with this job and with this skill. So I was able to do that for about 5 years or so.
And that's always, no matter who I talk to or when I think about my own role, there's always some type of core process that gives rise to a passion. And it makes so much sense about having a passion for giving people a safe and comfortable home. And thinking back to that story, I think, I worked in the insurance industry in catastrophe response. And just when you tell that story about that elderly woman, it makes me think of an elderly woman that I met after Hurricane Andrew, who was standing in line in the heat with, in a house coat, with a shopping bag and her little doggy on a leash. And she was bewildered that she had lost everything, and she didn't know how to call her daughter in Boston. And some of our awesome partners from the Red Cross came out of the line and got her to the airport and got her out of town. And when you have those kind of passions, it really helps. When we get into this work of disaster safety, it's so technical, and sometimes it takes so long. And one of the things I wanted to move to next is you at FEMA, because I met you early in my time with the Federal Alliance, and it's been 24 years, John, since then. And one of the things that I remember about meeting you is that you were one of the first people that encouraged us. Spaces and groups and causes can get crowded. And, when we first started out, you pulled me aside and said, "Listen, get in there. We need you. We need consumer outreach, and we need everyone at this table until every home is safe and secure. Our job isn't done." And you helped bring us into the work that we do today with FEMA and the Building Science Branch, and just forging those relationships, taking the important technical information you guys craft and identify, and then helping bring it to people. So help everyone understand, what does the lead physical scientist at FEMA do every day?
Okay, that's a great question. Part of that is after I finished my job in New York, I found myself in Florida, and it was in the 90s after Hurricane Andrew, and I ended up working at a building code department as a plans examiner, and I, again, good at exams and tests and got all these certifications. And we had a no-name storm that there was a lot of flooding, a lot of damage. And that was my interaction engagement with FEMA and helping to recover and deal with damaged structures. So as part of that next job, it was being exposed to FEMA and FEMA's mission. And they sent me to the Emergency Management Institute to learn everything about managing floodplain development. And in that course, the instructor said, "Hey, we're recruiting for a civil engineer at FEMA headquarters, so someone who knows building codes." And I had to turn around because I thought to myself, wow, he's talking to me. Did you hear that? So apply. So that's what I did, Leslie. And 9 months later, FEMA contacted me. "Are you still interested in the job?" So as I was hired as a civil engineer, and I got to work on a range of activities and projects and work, it led to my current position, lead physical scientist. And this is for building sciences. This is This is what we say is the technical services that we support the FEMA programs, and you consider the cycle of a disaster. When a disaster happens, what just happened? How did the building perform? What can we learn? What are the trends, good or bad? So there's a whole library of building science guidance, design and construction guidance it's in our purview. And then it's taking that knowledge and bringing it along with other partners, combined with research and testing. And can we make these codes and standards a little bit stronger, more resilient? That's another part of the work that we do in building science. And then realizing, like what we're talking about here today, we can have the best codes and standards and they sit on the shelf. So how do we get them into the hands of decision makers, communities, and get everybody rallying around building codes, so to speak?
Right. And so many of our listeners are kind of part of the family, right? They're in the disaster safety and resilience movement, so they may know a lot about building codes. And I want to talk more about our project in common with No Code, No Confidence in a minute. But before we do, I had an interview a couple days ago with a reporter, and it reminded me that it's really important to make that connection between building codes and disasters, because the reporter asked me, why does FEMA care so much about building codes? And I think that was something we should write down and remember to say each and every time we speak beyond the movement, because not everybody naturally understands the linkage. So I was wondering if you could kind of, in your words, describe how building codes and disaster outcomes influence each other, and your experience, why those critical connections and that priority is there for FEMA.
Leslie, I'm going to boil it down to 5 reasons. Basically, building codes are so important because they safeguard our communities against natural disasters, and they improve your community in 5 ways. And so building codes protect, building codes work, building codes are always improving, building codes level the playing field, and building codes help your community. So I boil it down to those 5 reasons, and we can get into the nuances all across that. But I also want to be non-technical. I say that building codes are your friend. And a friend is someone that you care about and you trust in and you enjoy being around. And maybe I'm a little bit different because I'm so close to it, but I really feel it. Building codes are there to be our friend and to care for us in the homes and the buildings and the structures and the places where we live and work.
Yeah, and so the building codes are essential. And we always talk about, like we are here, building codes are the foundation for resilience, without which you can't get a good outcome when tested. And the test could come over time. You know, you talked about 25-year-old structures that you can still see parts of in Italy because they were built so well, they're still there. In the Pantheon in Rome, of course, is one of my favorites. One continuous pour of cement and no cracks, and it's still there. But building codes are not popular with those that don't understand them because they don't realize they're a quiet asset in our communities. And several years ago, we decided, knowing that building codes are just not top of mind, and those that are in a position to adopt codes have always told us, I want my constituents to understand why I'm investing in building codes, the training, the administration of codes, hiring people to enforce the codes. You know, communities have to make decisions, right, about how to spend their money. And so it's important that the people that live in that community value codes, or they're not going to want them to invest in codes. And this is where I think some of the breakdown occurs, because as we know and have measured, not every community has the codes they need to be safe and resilient when tested by disaster. So you, several years ago, told us, hey, it's time for us to figure this thing out and find out what people think about codes. And then from there, how can we get them on board and make sure they do understand those things that you said, that they help, they protect, and they are constantly being improved, and really kind of raise the profile of codes. So can you talk about a little bit about what we learned together? Well, first of all, your charge to us was, we got to make building codes sexy, right? Which is funny to think of because they're not. And we did some research together. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about some of the things that we validated and learned that people were thinking.
Absolutely. What was really cool is the experts that you brought along and kind of looked at it from the consumer point of view. And here we are today. Consumers are bombarded constantly, right, in this digital age, and there's so many things that are vying for their attention, right? And so if they didn't already care about building codes, what was going to change that? They may never give it another chance, another thought. So that's where this idea stemmed from. What do consumers think or assume or have misconception about? And if we were to break down those misconceptions, to be transparent and tell them like it is, what would their reaction be? Because, Leslie, building codes are a public process all across this country, just like, school board meetings and town hall meetings, and the public is invited. And we thought if we could give them a little bit of knowledge and tap into what they really care about, we could see a more holistic change and, get consumers starting to think that the codes are sexy and to care about them, right? So, yes, building codes have come a long way, but still, Leslie, across the nation, if we look at today's codes and as hazard resistant as they are, we can only count about 1/3 of the nation's communities that we can say have a recent code, and then those natural hazard provisions are intact and they haven't deleted them or weakened them. So 1/3, is that the best we can do, right? So that's where this campaign, this idea came from. So I was so gratified and thankful to be part of the project.
Well, we have really had fun with the project. And as you said, our research partners really help us stay focused on consumers. And the first thing we learned is that consumers equate how safety for their home with safety for their car. And since there's such a clear and obvious safety record with cars, they assumed everything was already accomplished for their home. And what we found is that they weren't caring about codes because they thought they were all handled already. And that's how we were able to find an inroad to that conversation with them about what if you don't have a code at all? And that's where I think that our work has really resonated with this idea, and the research you guys do and the measurements that you take and track quarterly of how many communities, like you just mentioned, 1/3 of the country has a code that contains what they need. You live in earthquake country, you've got some seismic provisions. You live in flood country, you've got the flood provisions. And you live in high wind zone, you've got high wind. And then it gets really interesting because you probably live in a place that has more than one thing, right? So you need all of them. And it's been really fascinating to watch the progress. I think transparency became our call to action, right? We realized that, one of the things I always said about this that we learned is if we validated that people weren't thinking about codes back then. And hopefully that's changed through our efforts. I think it has. I know in the public policy arena, it most certainly has, because of the passage of DRRA in 2018, the Resilient America Act that is now pending, the additional resources you guys are putting into codes. Clearly, the leadership of the country has figured out the relationship between disaster outcomes and the presence or absence of codes. I think that case is made. We still have work to do with the consumers, but one of the things we found is that if we could give them the information, and again, you gave us the challenge of figuring out how to provide people with transparent status information about their codes. And that's been a big part. One of the things, so what we've done because you've been helping us lead that and challenging us every step of the way with creating the inspecttoprotect.org website. We started out telling people, here's your building code status for your community today. And that was the best data we had at the time. And then the next thing you told us is, all right, now you need to help people understand what the code was when their house was built, which was probably not this year, right? So we had to get the historic. And also other things to enhance the user experience so that it's relevant to them. Was there a disaster there before? And is the code there strong for if so? Okay, they learn they might be in an earthquake zone. Is my code strong for earthquake or not? As the program grows and the transparency movement grows about building codes, What do you think is next? I know we have a lot of data to figure out because there are a lot of places codes are not digitized, just a digital world. When it comes to codes, we need more of that, right? What would you like to see the ease? And I got to be careful here. If I ask you what you want to see, we have to figure out how to get it done. But I mean, when it comes to building codes, I'm not even sure that I know after every disaster, we've had a recent tornado outbreak. The first thing that happens, we had the December outbreak. People said, well, what are the codes where that happened? I'm trying to figure out. What do you guys look at after a disaster with respect to the codes? Is that the first thing that you wonder as you guys are trying to assess?
That's a great question. And part of our success is the ability to study building performance after disasters. And we call this our Mitigation Assessment Team program. And again, with today's digital age and tools, and we have a great sense in working with our partners, what is happening on the ground in a hurricane and a flood. So we're collecting data. We're looking at assessments of damage that are done, virtually or remotely. And we're getting a sense what kind of event was this in terms of the codes and standards? Was this a design event? Did this exceed the design criteria for that are in today's codes for buildings and structures?
Help people understand, what does that mean when you say, is it a design event? Yeah. Pretend I'm my grandmother and you're explaining it to me.
Yeah. So if this is an approaching a hurricane, what is the strength of that hurricane? Different categories of hurricane have characteristics of wind speeds, of storm surge, of areas of impact. And our codes today are designed looking at historical events and probabilities that structures are going to design for life safety up to a certain level, right? So if we've built the structure to survive a Category 2 event, it could still get damaged, but is it going to collapse and be a total loss? The codes are designed to prevent that. But if we see damage where that happened, then what was the culprit? What was the cause of that? Or, Leslie, if we see an event that was stronger than this design level, and we saw buildings that withstood, we'll say, why did that happen? What was the secret in the structural integrity, in the building envelope, in the building enclosure, and how it was elevated, right? So all of those help us to see what that event presented itself in terms of its impacts from a design point of view.
And then do you take those findings and those are fed into the next version of the code, right?
Absolutely.
And that's part of y'all's role at FEMA, correct?
Yeah. The codes are this recipe book, right? With all of these recipes inside, and these recipes are made up of these consensus standards. And these consensus standards inform the key design considerations, the prescriptive criteria, as well as the performance criteria, how you consider and combine loads. And so in the standards, that's where it starts. So being engaged in the standards development process. And then as those standards are considered to be brought in, incorporated by reference into this building code recipe book, this is the sausage making, if you will. And that's where ourselves and other groups come to these standards councils and these code hearings, and everything is data driven, and your proposals have to be backed up by studies, evaluations, tests, data. And incrementally over time, we've seen the codes get stronger and stronger.
And it sounds like that part of the code process and the updating the code works very well. What part of it could use some work? Is it fast enough? Do we get the improvements into the code swiftly enough, or is there a way to expedite the insights that we get when they're resoundingly proven? We have a big, seems like we always have a big aha from large scale disasters. I remember after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, we collectively looked at gable end wall homes and said, these probably shouldn't be built in the high wind zone, or if they're going to be built, they need to be built differently and properly braced. And that became a part of the code next time. But Is it fast enough? And I understand how critical it is to gather the evidence, be deliberative, and build a consensus. But is there a way to do it more swiftly?
So, Leslie, as I've been involved in this for the better part of 2 decades, I personally wish we can turn things on a dime and do that. But let's recognize what I said before. This recipe book that makes up the code, and, structural integrity is a big part of it. But there's so many other parts of that too. So we have to work within that framework, and also recognizing that, yeah, if the code or the standard is not moving as fast as you want, then there's other things that we can do. We can fill the gaps. With technical guidance. We can fill the gaps with prescriptive solutions that not only comply with the code, but advance some of these resilient and hazard resistant concepts. And I think about the work that FEMA has done with safe rooms, with tornado safe rooms. And this is something that had not been in the codes previously, but the idea that a structure was going to be robust enough to provide near absolute protection to survive extreme tornado events, especially in Tornado Alley. Well, again, with the field work and the partnerships and academic partners there too, FEMA Safe Room Guides were published and being used for many years before they became a consensus standard, before they became a requirement in today's codes. So there are things that we can do to bring this new knowledge, to bring these concepts of resilience, and other programs like even in Flash and IBHS are presenting ways to be a little more resilient in an affordable way. So over time, we see the codes getting better and better. 3 years is the normal cycle, and that allows us to see and measure and evaluate and work on these improvements. So if you look at things like safe rooms and freeboard and sealed roof decks and gable bracing, many things that the codes didn't have before, and now they're just common. They're just standard practice.
And that's a really good reminder. I think when we get impatient with the code, we have to remember that you don't have to wait for the code. If you have the information, I think that you make a great point. That's exactly what you're doing with, I remember a South Napa earthquake, a chimney bracing advisory, a recovery advisory. You guys created those technical bulletins and that information, and you sped it to market. And I think that's a great point that we should make sure. I think the code may be the last and most lasting stop on the train after some early action is out there on certain things. And I think that's an important reminder. I know that I live in Florida, and there's some work that people are doing to address the Surfside collapse, the tragedy of the condo collapse we had here. And it's going to take a while, but I think some of those associations have already taken action on their own, and they're not waiting. They're doing, they've changed their maintenance and inspection and engineering certification cycles already on their own. And so I think that's a really good point to bring into it is you don't have to wait. And that's, I think, we talk sometimes, we worry about states where the code cycle's been stretched statutorily to 6 years. And there's some really interesting linkage now because a lot of federal resources are tied to the current status of the code. And we were talking to one of the states about it, and one of our other partners reminded them, you don't have to wait. You can just skip a cycle and get caught up. So there's more than one way to get, where you need to go. And I think codes are really important. And I think a lot of the process kind of grounds it because the codes do get it right. And because of the work that you guys do and the post-disaster assessment, the research by our other partners and their laboratories, and then just practical and innovative things that people are doing. I think that we have, I don't know if you agree, I think we've made tremendous progress on the leadership front, as I said before, the stakeholder front. I think there's a resounding support inside the movement for codes, but I think the unconquered is the consumer. And that's what's exciting about this idea of helping them understand. One of the enhancements, that we've made together to the inspectorprotect.org is now you can get, if the data is available, and data availability is always a challenge with everything, where the data is available for your home, when you do a lookup on the site, you're not just getting your code status, you're getting the relevant upgrades or retrofits that you may want to consider given the hazards that you face where you live. So if my home is built in Florida in 1970, it was built before the advent of a more modern code here, I'm going to get a long list of potential suggestions of things I can do. And this is what consumers are looking for. But if I put in 2007, the list is a lot shorter. So I think we're making progress there. And I hope anybody that hears the podcast will think of the other things that they want to see. That we recently were asked to put the unreinforced masonry data set into Inspector Protect so that people living in seismic zones would be aware that the building, maybe there are apartments in a building that's older and it is unreinforced masonry. And as we know, that's a crucible for problems in a major earthquake because they don't survive. And we have ways to retrofit, but it's very expensive. So I think all of this is about information is power, knowledge is power, and the consumer is the last and great unconquered. And so one of the things I wanted to kind of dive into before we wrap up to help consumers get excited about building safety. And when we talk to consumers, we usually talk around safety and not about building codes because codes they're not there yet as a draw, right? Tell our listeners how to get involved and what message you had for them.
I'm delighted to do that to what we're talking about here and who we're talking to. Every year, this opportunity for all of these groups to come together and do the things that we're doing, raise the awareness, heighten the importance, connect people with resources. And FEMA wants to be an active partner in this. And recently, and one of the things that we're excited to unveil soon is all of the things that we've done over the years has happened in different pockets or different parts of the agency, but not really in a cohesive way. So we're excited about, as an agency, to unveil FEMA's very own first ever building code strategy, and always thinking of who our customers are. So there's 3 goals to that strategy that should resonate with everybody. Number 1 is most all of our programs touch different audiences, different stakeholder groups. So if we're successful, we're going to integrate building codes and standards across FEMA, across all of those programs. And the second thing is a lot of what we've talked about is this the best we can do? As much as the hazard resistance has improved in today's minimum consensus codes and standards, our second goal is to strengthen nationwide capability for superior building performance. And that's going to take many shapes and forms. And then the third one is the most exciting. And maybe this is kind of like our rally cry or our call to action. But that is just it. Drive public action on building codes. And I like to say we're not just saying these words. We're showing up with these programs, with these grants, with these technical resources and assistance. I could tell you in 22 years of FEMA, where we are now in terms of the focus, the support, the attention, the priority of building codes at FEMA across federal agencies and with this administration is at its peak, or, I hope it even goes higher. So there's many ways that communities, stakeholders can take advantage of pre-disaster and post-disaster grants that are going to fund not only projects to make them resilient, but also the important thing of starting with adopting a code. I've got a code and I want to improve it. I've got a code. I want to be more effective in implementing it. Right. So it's both the process and the projects. And that's what I'd say. We're going to come alongside consumers, different groups, creating that awareness, and really kind of join us in this call to action. I'm excited about what the future brings, and I hope we've created a little bit of excitement here today.
Absolutely, which you always do. So, John, I want to thank you for joining us today for this podcast for Strong Homes, Safe Families, and helping people understand what they can do. You know, the disaster safety and resilience movement, when things turn out well after disaster, getting there can be a little complicated, and your insights on codes are really helping us understand that it may be complicated, but we know where it begins. And it does begin with building codes and getting those in place. And the good news that you've shared about building codes, that the resources are growing to get codes and to administer codes in communities, that there are places, thanks to you guys, that are possible to look up your code and even find out where are you starting from with your own house by going to inspecttorprotect.org. And then, you know, in the future that we've got all kinds of things in mind to continue to help with transparency and with the support of the research community and the engineering community, get these answers right, make these homes safer, stronger, more sustainable and durable each and every time and through each and every update to the code. So thank you very, very much. I want to remind everybody that our content at flash.org is available in English and in Spanish. And if we said anything here today that you want to talk about or learn more about, you can email us at info@flash.org, or you can even call us on our hotline at 877-221-SAFE. That's 877-221-7233. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and go on iTunes and give us a review if you were so inclined. And thank John for joining us. And then I guess from here, all I need to say is thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Leslie.